So you see, even just with the pumpkins, there's such a wide choice from what you can eat. And yeah, I'm sure there's a lot that you can do with this type of pumpkins. You can cook them whole, you can cut them, you can mix them with some other stuff. These are the different types of pumpkins you have, and you can see how big these ones are. I mean, can you imagine having to cook this pumpkin if you had a feast? Whether you had 40 people, you could feed them from just that one pumpkin. Look at the type of beautiful, beautiful sweet potatoes that we have. This one is solid. You don't have to add anything onto it. And yeah, we've got different types of pumpkins there as well. We've got the African melons. You can make preserves from these. You can cook them, mix them with your crushed sorghum meal. You can mix them with your maize meal or whatever that you want to do with them. So we've got all of these. We've got some indigenous teas. We've got the beans already packed. You already see there's more beans than what you would actually find in the stores. All of that stuff nicely packed. We've got different types of grains, flours, milled kind of grains. Yeah, so there we've got mung beans that still needs to be deshelled, but those are the options we have. We've got the African cucumbers as well as another kind of a crop that people can eat, and we know it's highly loaded in iron, so people that are anemic, that are not feeling so good, low blood kind of situation, they could actually feast on those. So they don't feel that I'm popping a pill, because you're eating something that really already solves your health problems.
Welcome back to Africa Science Focus, the weekly science and development show from SciDevNet. I'm Ogechi Ekeanyo. You are just listening to Siphiwe Sithole, a farmer and managing director at the African Marmalade, an agribusiness involved in growing indigenous African crops using only local seed varieties. In this episode of our Science Explained series, we will look at the significance of indigenous crops and local seeds in farming in the sub-Saharan Africa region. Agricultural researchers say that local crops hold immense potential because they are naturally suited to thrive in Africa's diverse climates. For instance, in the Neglected Crops of Africa study published in the International Journal for Agricultural Technology, agriculture diversity researchers found that many plant species in Africa are untapped. This stemmed from factors such as the loss of local knowledge, a lack of research, and limited marketing opportunities. In another study, titled Bringing Back Neglected Crops, a Food and Climate Solution for Africa, the food researchers say reviving forgotten local crops is key to addressing sub-Saharan Africa's food insecurity challenges amidst the changing climate conditions. Our reporter, Elna Schütz, speaks to Siphiwe on why local crops are an essential way out of the food insecurity challenges in Africa.
I'm standing in between sunflowers and vegetable patches on the African Marmalade farm, just outside of Johannesburg, South Africa. It's peaceful here under the trees with birds chirping, but inside the buildings, there is a flurry of workers carrying melons, pumpkins, and beans of all kinds of colors and shapes. In fact, many of them look different to what you might see in a standard supermarket. And that is important. I'm about to talk to the farmer, Siphiwe Sithole, about why the kinds of seeds she uses and teaches others to use matter. So tell me, what is African Marmalade? What does it do?
African Marmalade is an agribusiness. We are involved in growing indigenous African crops and some of what we would call heritage food or crops that have already been kind of localized. We also produce and propagate seeds, and we call ourselves seed guardians. We distribute a lot of indigenous, healthy, nutrient-dense food items to different customers. We also train other businesses that want to grow the sustainable way of growing food. We also assist people in mechanization, trying to actually grow the scale of their agricultural businesses.
So why don't you call yourself a seed guardian? Why don't you plant the same vegetables I see in every supermarket?
Well, the reason why we don't grow those kind of vegetables is that, one, there's already many people that are doing that. Two, a lot of these vegetables, which we can call exotic or Western or modern vegetables, they tend to be non-indigenous. They therefore guzzle quite a lot of water. They take quite a lot of effort to grow. They also attract a number of pests because they have not been domesticated. So you're growing something that was meant to grow in Western Europe or in the Mediterranean, and you're growing it in a subtropical region. So obviously that is going to be grown with a lot of effort. So when we grow our own indigenous crops, first of all is that we are being kind to our soil, because those crops are adaptable to that kind of an environment. They grow with ease. That's why a lot of them end up being called wild, because they just grow there on their own. You could walk around and find amaranth. You're gonna go find blackjack and whatever other stuff. You African melons and cucumbers. They just grow there in the wild. You don't need to water them. You do not have to look after them. You don't have to prune them. You just find them. Nature gives you the stuff in abundance. So when you grow this, first of all, it means that it's an effortless way of growing food. It takes less effort from you. You can provide for your family. You're being kind to the environment. You're also not taking a lot of water. But beyond that, research and studies have shown that these far outweigh the nutritional value of a lot of their modern or popular vegetables. And that is why we've got to do that, because in this country and in this region, we've got far more poor people than we have affluent people or even middle class, meaning that the poor people they probably go on 1 or 2 meals a day as opposed to the regular 3. So you need to make sure that whether you're going to have 500 grams of food, it better be good. It better be healthy. It's got to feed your body. It's got to nourish you. It's got to be your medicine as well. So we need to get sure that people are eating their own medicine. Lastly is that South Africa as a country, it is a vitamin A and an iron deficient country. So when we promote these indigenous crops, we are making sure that people are getting medicine or the relevant nutrients that they need, because otherwise our healthcare system is going to be bloated, because now somebody has had the 3 meals a day, they still need to get certain supplements which they really cannot afford. Many times, even if you've been prescribed to get these, if you are relying on government supply, you might go to the clinic and find that they're actually out of stock. We've seen it during COVID, how many people defaulted from their medicine because when they went there was no supply, and then there's a sudden, and also their earning powers have been reduced. So they didn't even have the money to say, I can actually go to a chemist and buy this thing myself.
According to the Food and Agricultural Organization, in sub-Saharan Africa, over 80% of sub-Saharan Africa's cropland is owned by smallholders. However, climate change makes farming harder for these farmers. Mariam Mayet, who is the Executive Director of the African Centre for Biodiversity, talks about what farming is like in Africa.
Now, traditionally, African farmers have saved soft and bred seeds to suit local conditions. But as private seed companies began to grow and consolidate, and they focus on a narrower range of seeds, of a handful of commercially lucrative crops. So these, a handful of commercially lucrative crops would include things like soybean, sunflower, so the oilseeds, maize, wheat. Although we're not big wheat growers, we import a lot of wheat, but it's part of the commercial bundle. Then in West Africa, there's a lot of oil palm. So we do grow some tea and coffee in some parts of Africa, but you can see that it takes the shape very much of colonial plantation crops. There's still a lot of sugarcane being grown, cotton in West Africa. So these all colonial type crops, and then the major commercial crops, and then the commercial vegetables is mostly imported. So as these private seed companies continue to grow and consolidate, and they focus on a very narrow range of seed, obviously, we will find that our agricultural biodiversity will become depleted. At the same time, we show that the total crop diversity in the world in the past 50 years or so have been substantially eroded because of the expansion of industrial agriculture in this narrow band of commercial crops and the expansion of small-scale farmers to operate, because it's within the small-scale farming seed systems where you're finding the diversity, because they have been traditionally recognized also in international treaties as custodian of biodiversity and responsible for over 10,000 years of breeding that brought about the diversity we have in the world.
Mariam highlighted the concerning trend of narrowing biodiversity. But what does this mean? To find out, we're going over to Professor Albert Modi, the Executive Dean of the Faculty of Natural Sciences at the Walter Sisulu University, South Africa.
Research shows that over time, we have focused on a few crop species that feed the world, mainly because of the technology that we use to increase the manipulation of these crop species so that they can be amenable to domestication. Remember, before there was agriculture, as it is known from the scientific perspective, there were attempts for us to access food. And at that time, it was not called agriculture. It was a social process that became an economic process of identifying usable plants in the world. So at that time, with thousands of species to choose from in the wild. But of course, because we had to have some of them closer to us, we selected those that are going to be easy for us to keep the seeds off, store the seeds for long, or as long as possible as we are migrating from one place to another. And when we plant them, our wish was that they will reproduce what we know. So the challenge was that as you move seeds from one environmental condition to another, or one environmental climate to another, the performance of that seed would vary depending on the environmental conditions where you find it. So in the end, we ended up now having a few crop species. For example, rice, wheat, and maize are the dominant cereals that feed us. And then you've got potato and other vegetables that are widespread. But in terms of the major food sources, we've got these three cereals that dominate. And so we were challenged now where the majority of what was called the genetic material, germplasm, is sitting in the hands of a few people who have the technology to manipulate these crops so that they can do what we want them to do in a wide range of environmental conditions. And that excludes the majority of people from actually owning the seeds as such, because they have to rely on people who are selling these seeds.
That lack of diversity, how does it affect those people, whether that's their health, their economies? What are the larger effects?
I think the first thing that I should say is that, yes, we say there's lack of diversity, but we can also argue that there is diversity. The lack of diversity is caused by the fact that we have commercialized seed access and pushed the genetically modified crops as the main source of food, while we ignore the existing biodiversity of non-commercialized edible crops. So the effect of this has been that people who do not have access to the genetically modified seeds not able to produce them, even if you were to give them these seeds, without providing all the necessary management conditions and the manipulation of the environment to produce the seeds. So it is pushing the large number of people who have no access to facilities, tools, equipment, and knowledge to poverty. And now the importance of money in food security is increasing unnecessarily. So you are now making poor people with no access to their own seeds, no access to money, rely on having to buy its food from supermarkets instead of them having to go side of their foods. And the consequence then is that even when they buy their own foods, they will mainly buy those that are rich in carbohydrates, because those are the ones that are relatively cheap. They are the staple foods. And the ones that are rich in other nutrients, minerals, and vitamins, will be more expensive for them, and they will be forced to buy them if they've got money. But in a way, they are basically forced not to buy them, and that compromises the food security, which means their ability to live a livelihood where health is protected as a result of having access to food.
We go back to Mariam, who spoke to us about some of the issues with Africa's seed system and what it means for agriculture.
I think that we need to understand that our seed systems in sub-Saharan Africa is classified in the literature as being two systems, okay? One they call the formal system and one they call the informal system. Although we have pioneered a new discourse and new terminology, and we have shifted the thinking away from informal seed systems to one that is called farmer managed seed systems. So in majority of the countries on the continent, there's a significant degree of separateness between the two systems, but also an integration. There's also a third system that is not well researched and spoken about, and this is seed aid that comes in from the global markets through the World Food Programme and other charitable agencies, and they go mainly to strife-torn countries like Burundi, the DRC, Somalia, I would think, South Sudan, parts of Kenya, and Zimbabwe. Now, maize and horticulture are the two biggest seed markets on the continent, with maize being mainly hybrid. And when we talk about hybrid maize, we're talking about a process that results from the fertilization of one plant by another genetically unrelated plant. And so this plant that bears the seed is called the female or seed parent, while the plant that provides the pollen to fertilize the female is called a male or pollen parent. So the hybrid maize sector is mostly in the hands of big companies. This is where a lot of the intellectual property rights reside over the special breeding lines. And it's very, very lucrative, especially in terms of maize. Almost all the maize grown in South Africa is genetically modified, and the traits are owned by one or other of those multinational companies, and they also license to each other. It's completely reliant on agrochemicals. GM maize must be grown with concoction of glyphosate, glyphosate ammonium, and now more recently in South Africa, they've approved GM maize to resist, to be tolerant to 2,4-D. Now, you must remember that hybrid maize means that if you save the seed and you try to replant it for the second season, it loses a lot of vigor and you'll have very bad yields. So hybrid maize is kind of a form of inbred intellectual property, because you have to go back to the seed company every year and buy new seed. And this is where the seed companies make their money. They are completely and utterly opposed to the notion that farmers are allowed to save seed from the previous harvest for the purposes of propagating that seed, for propagating purposes as seed, and for growing the next year's crop. So it's really important to understand the mechanisms around hybrid seed and the extent to which it takes away agency from farmers and the dependency created by these companies on the part of farmers. We've seen over the last 10 years, especially, that many countries on the continent began to introduce very draconian seed laws and policies. So we're seeing a lot of lockdown of these systems and a lot of criminalizing of these systems and the expansion of the footprint of the corporate seed sector, of industrial agriculture, and a lot of pressure for land. So we've also seen a lot of land grabbing, a lot of dispossession taking place. We've seen, so as a lot of extractive activities like mining, industrial agriculture, plantations expand to feed ever-growing markets, they need more and more land. Conflicts are also responsible for a lot of dispossession of small-scale farmers. And we now find ourselves in the dire circumstances where our agricultural biodiversity is being imperiled. And if our agricultural biodiversity is imperiled, we will not have a chance of existence on this earth.
In sub-Saharan Africa, the effects of colonialism have led to the loss of local seeds and a decline in agricultural biodiversity. Method Gundidza, director of EarthLore Foundation, told us more about this.
When we talk about the losing of certain seeds and varieties, local seeds and varieties of them, we can't not talk about colonialism. And by this, I mean the way food has been organized since colonial times has been such that there has been a discouragement of communities actually growing their own local seed varieties, which did not require them to go to the shops to buy. So there is a connection between the whole thing of economy and what people need to grow and eat. I'll give you an example of maize hybrid and GMO seeds that are promoted through government programs and even through some local non-government organizations and non-profit organizations. These are varieties that farmers plant and harvest one season, and they have to go back buy the same seeds the following year. Now, they are not going to buy only the seeds. That seed comes with a pack of, other things. So it's the seed, it is the fertilizer, it is the pesticides as well. It's a package that comes and is nearly given to people through government programs, sometimes for free, and through this constant service of being given seeds. And some of these programs actually working through contract farming, where farmers give up bits of their land and over time, almost all of their land to grow crops for other people, for sale and not for consumption. In the end, farmers forget that they have to plant their own seeds suited for local conditions, for local climatic conditions, and therefore can be more resilient, better resilient than seeds that come from elsewhere.
So I wonder, in shifting this, not just in terms of particular communities, but on a larger scale, what role does science play?
Science has a big role to play. Why I think it is because when we look at science in the way it is taught in school, And I have to say that I think that indigenous knowledge systems are also a form of science, which isn't taught in school, which our children aren't exposed to it. They are exposed to science which has a history and a background and a focus more on Western ideas and concepts and ways of seeing and working. And I think that science hasn't focused more on identifying local seed varieties and then amplifying the medicinal, nutritional, health, and all those benefits that are derived from local seed varieties. And that through science, bringing all this up and then really put it out into the open and give this into curricula so that we understand that the local seed varieties and the foods they produce are good for us, and it is good to plant them and to eat them.
We're going back to Mariam to discuss ways African smallholder farmers can incorporate local seeds in their farming.
We're going to have to accept that things will have to change. We're going to have to realize that we will have to revise national, regional, continental, and international policies to reflect the interconnectedness between biodiversity, climate change, food systems, the pharmaceutical systems, and the agriculture agendas. At the moment, it's been dealt with in a very siloed approach. And we need to look at how these are mutually reinforcing. We need to have a just transition that looks beyond pathways just to decarbonize economies. And we know that nobody in the world is seriously thinking of cutting fuel production, cutting the production of oil, gas. We know that that's not going to happen. And rather look at the impacts and ramifications that go beyond just this dogmatic focus on a climate solution and to the intersecting crisis that we are facing and address it in multiple ways and multiple pathways. Now, diverse territorial food systems could be one pathway. We're not saying it's going to solve all our problems, but we need to think about how we can build on smallholder farmer seed systems, because these offer and embed already an agroecological agricultural biodiversity approach. And it already is situated at the cusp of a transition. And we need to transition this, we need to situate such a transition within real transformative systems changes that do not feed off our own existence and destroy our own existence in an endless growth, accumulation, and private appropriation of surplus paradigm. Because nature is finite and we have only so much time to ensure that we live on this earth in harmony with nature and not in a destructive way, so that we can at least leave something for future generations.
That's all from us at Science Explained today. If you want to find out more, head to the SciDevNet website. That's www.scidev.net. Today's show was produced by Alice Hurst, with editing by Ogechi Kianyo and Titilope Fadare, and hosting by me, Ogechi Kianyo. Today's reporter was Elna Schütz. Until next time, goodbye. Africa Science Focus is produced by SciDevNet and distributed in association with your local radio station.